For most of human history, you can think of the world as a collection of islands. Not literal islands, of course, but islands of civilization, cut off from each other by massive oceans and impossible deserts. But in the period between 1200 and 1450, everything changed. Those islands got connected, woven together by these incredible threads of commerce, culture, and conquest, creating what was really the first global network. And we're going to talk about how that great reconnection happened. And if you want a perfect snapshot of just how wild this new era was, look no further than Marco Polo. After spending 2 decades in Asia, his stories about these advanced cities and unbelievable wealth sounded so crazy to people back home that he famously said, "I haven't told you half of what I saw because I knew you wouldn't believe me." It was a world so new, it was literally beyond belief. So, what kicked all this off? What made this explosion of connection even possible? Well, the answer is kind of surprising and honestly pretty violent. The catalyst for an age of peaceful trade was actually one of the most fearsome military machines the world had ever seen. The spark that connected the globe was forged out on the vast open steppes of Eurasia by the Mongol Empire. So this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because you've got this paradox. How should we remember the Mongols? History kind of gives us 2 totally different pictures. On one hand, you have the destroyer, this image of a brutal conqueror leaving devastation everywhere. But on the other hand, you have the empire builder, the great unifier who created stability and made trade flourish between East and West like never before. And the truth? The truth is, they were both. To really get what they did, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of it all. Just look at this map. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history. It stretched all the way from what's now Russia and the Black Sea, completely across China to the Pacific Ocean. That's one single, unified zone of control. And out of all that violent conquest came something nobody saw coming, the Pax Mongolica, which just means the Mongol peace. For about a century, the very same warriors who had been so destructive became, well, the world's toughest police force. They secured the legendary Silk Roads, cracked down on bandits, and enforced the law. All of a sudden, a merchant could travel from Italy to China with a level of safety that would have sounded like science fiction just a generation before. And this newfound safety didn't just reopen a single road. No, it supercharged an entire global circulatory system. 3 massive networks became the arteries of Africa, Europe, and Asia, pumping not just goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultures all across the known world. Okay, so let's break these down. Each of these highways had its own specialty. You had the Silk Roads, right? That was for your high-end luxury goods. Silk, porcelain, stuff that was light enough to be carried by camel. Then, in the Indian Ocean, the sea lanes could handle way bulkier cargo, like spices and gold on these huge ships called junks and dhows. And across Africa, the trans-Saharan routes were famous for moving massive amounts of gold and salt. But here's the really crucial part. Every single one of these networks also became a highway for ideas, spreading religions like Islam and Buddhism everywhere. And you gotta remember, none of this was easy. To succeed on these routes, you had to master your environment. On land, as you can see with the caravan here, the absolute hero was the camel, just perfectly built for the desert. But out at sea, it was all about brainpower. This map shows the monsoon winds. See, sailors figured out that these winds reliably blew one way for half the year and then the complete opposite way for the other half. It created a natural, predictable highway on the water. And what held all these routes together? These magnificent trading cities. They became these vibrant, buzzing, melting pots of culture. On the Silk Road, you had places like Kashgar and Samarkand, which were basically oases for both trade and learning. In the Indian Ocean, ports like Calicut and Malacca were just humming with merchants from all over the world. And in West Africa, Timbuktu became legendary, not just for the gold salt trade, but for its world-class libraries and centers of learning. Okay, so we've got this incredible explosion of trade and cultural exchange happening. But what happens when you stitch the world together so tightly, so fast? Well, the consequences were huge. It's a story of spectacular innovation, profound belief, and a terrifying danger that nobody saw coming. It's the story of goods, gods, and germs. All right, let's start with the goods. Moving this much stuff around forced a total financial revolution. Think about it. Carrying mountains of metal coins is just way too dangerous and heavy. So in China, they developed this brilliant system of credit called flying cash. It was basically a paper receipt you could trade for coins when you got to your destination. This idea spread, it evolved into banking houses and bills of exchange, and let a merchant deposit gold in one city and pull it out in another. This is literally the ancestor of our modern banking system. And oh, the exchange went way beyond money. We're talking about world-altering technologies spreading from China to the West. Gunpowder, which would pretty much end the age of castles, the magnetic compass and the rudder, which were total game changers for sailing. New crops like this fast-growing champa rice led to huge population booms, and Europe got access to centuries of incredible scientific and medical knowledge from the Islamic world, plus the very numbers we still use today. Next up, gods. It's so important to remember this wasn't all about profit. For a lot of people, faith was the real driver. Take the great Muslim scholar Ibn Battuta. This guy traveled over 75,000 miles. Why? In his words, he was driven by a desire to visit these illustrious sanctuaries. He and countless other merchants and missionaries just like him carried their beliefs right along these trade routes, spreading religions like Islam and Buddhism across entire continents. So, this unprecedented connection brought prosperity, technology, and faith across the world. It brought everyone closer than ever before. But these new global arteries, they were carrying something else, something invisible and infinitely more deadly. Germs. Yeah, the dark side of this new global network was disease. The bubonic plague, the Black Death, it basically hitched a ride. It was carried by fleas on rats that stowed away in merchant caravans and cargo ships. It spread with terrifying speed along the exact same pathways that were carrying all that silk and all those spices. And the human cost it's just staggering. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. An estimated 25 million people died in Asia. Then, as it swept into Europe, it killed another 25 million. That's 1/3 of the entire continent's population, gone in less than 5 years. It was the single greatest catastrophe in human history, and it was only possible because of this newfound global connection. And that was the brutal lesson of the era, wasn't it? The world was now connected enough to share everything, from its greatest innovations to its most devastating plagues. A shared prosperity now meant a shared vulnerability, on a scale that no one had ever seen before. But here's the thing. The story doesn't just end in disaster. In fact, this period of intense connection, followed by this catastrophic collapse, didn't just mark the end of an era. It violently cleared the way for the next one, and it completely remade the world in its wake. Let's look at the aftershocks. So in Europe, the plague creates these massive labor shortages. Suddenly, the surviving workers can demand better wages, which shatters the old feudal system. At the same time, you've got gunpowder technology spreading from China, which makes knights and castles totally obsolete, effectively ending medieval warfare. And finally, key trade hubs like Constantinople, weakened by all this chaos, eventually fall, forcing Europeans to start looking for new ways to get to the east. And here is the final incredible twist. This whole period, the flood of new knowledge from the East, the collapse of the old social order, and that desperate search for new sea routes, all of it directly laid the groundwork for two of history's biggest turning points, the European Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. The Great Reconnection, with all of its triumphs and its tragedies, literally set the stage for the modern world. So this leaves us with one final, really crucial question. The first great wave of globalization was a double-edged sword. It proved that deep connection always comes with deep, unforeseen risks. As we navigate our own hyper-connected world of instant communication and global supply chains, this history really forces us to ask, what unintended consequences are we overlooking today?